Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Scott Dwyer. I'm the Executive Director for Sons of the Revolution, the state of New York, and its Fraunces Tavern Museum. We welcome you to another special Liberty 250 lecture with Fraunces Tavern Museum as we commemorate the 250th anniversaries of events in our nation's founding. Our kickoff to Liberty 250 included the opening of our special exhibition, Path to Liberty, The Emergence of a Nation, commemorating the United States semi-quincentennial. It's a chronological multi-year exhibition telling the history of the American Revolution from 1775 to 1783, with a distinctive focus on what occurred in New York State and the surrounding areas. We would like to give special thanks to the lead sponsors of our 250th exhibition, Peter C. Hine and Ann Farley, William Hale Kirby, Mrs. Stanley DeForest Scott, and Stephen T. Whalen. For those of you joining virtually, if you have any questions during the lecture, please leave them in the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring the Q&A during the lecture, so don't worry about saving those questions to the end. If you are joining us in person, you will be able to ask your questions at the end of the lecture. I will try to get to as many questions as possible. As always, please note the views of the speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York or its Fraunces Tavern Museum. With that, I turn it over to introduce our author, Peter J.W. Sherwin, President of Sons of the Revolution.
Thank you very much, Scott. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming. We have a wonderful lecture series here at our Fraunces Tavern Museum, and Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York is so proud to make this available to those in the room, as well as those joining us remotely and who will watch this on our YouTube channel and other venues. Briefly, because I don't want to hold us up getting to the main event for this evening, I do want to recognize some of the fellow members of the Sons who are with us this evening. In particular, we have with us our immediate past president, Peter Hine, his immediate past president, Ambrose Richardson. We have our treasurer, Mark Kapinski, our secretary, Justin Tessier, registrar, Scott Jeffrey, and board members, Alan Borst, Russell Moore, Calvin Ramsey, and did I miss anybody? I hope not. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much for all of your contributions to our society. But now it's really my pleasure to introduce to all of you, Michael Cecere. Now, Michael has exhausted me, and we only just met. And that's because he taught high school and college level American history for 30 years in both Fairfax County and Gloucester County, Virginia. He's the author of not one, not three, but a whopping 25 books, plus numerous articles on the American Revolution and the Revolutionary War, and he continues to research and write. And his most recent book came out last November, and it's over there on the table, and it's entitled Spark of Independence, and it examines the New England colonies in 1775 to 1776. And it's the last volume in a triumvirate of volumes focused on that very important beginning period of the Revolutionary War that often people overlook because they're excited about the Declaration of Independence, which is wonderful and everything, but a lot happened before then, starting, of course, with the alarms on Lexington and Concord, April 19, 1775. And so the other two volumes are United for Independence, focusing on the middle colonies, and March to Independence, focused on the southern colonies. And in his spare time, I know he's even got some, he volunteers and he works at Colonial Williamsburg. He participates in Revolutionary War reenactments throughout the East Coast, and he lectures at historic sites and historical societies, such as our own. So Michael, thank you very much. We're really pleased and excited about your lecture tonight entitled The Conflict Spreads the American colonies after Lexington and Concord. Take it away.
That was wonderful. Should we leave this one down? Leave it right where it is? Because move it up. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So first I want to say I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I've been telling some of my friends, I feel like a country mouse going to the big city, and this is the Emerald City of all places. And when I got here, it was daylight, and when I leave, I bet I'll be wowed by the lights. I mentioned to Melissa, it's like, you got to come down to Williamsburg during Christmas, and you got to go to Christmas Town, which is an amusement park, Busch Gardens. And then I went, wait a minute, you have lights every night that just wow you here probably. So it might not be as impressive, but this is impressive. This is my first visit to Fraunces Tavern, and I am wowed. And thank you all for what you've done to maintain this building. I've learned at least a dozen new things just taking the tour about one of my own, General Washington. You know, who I highly admire, and his role and his involvement with this place. So it's a wonderful little tour, and I urge people to come and visit. So they have so much to offer here. So my topic is going to be about, as Peter said, it's going to cover that early part. And it began several years ago with the March to Independence book idea. See, I've written a lot of books, but they generally been about Virginia or Virginians, you know, officers or men, if I could find the documentation for the soldiers. And then events that involve Virginia regiments or Virginia units or Virginia itself. But I branched out with March to Independence, and because I wanted to know what happened in the Carolinas and in Georgia too, and the early work. When people found out I was writing a book about the South, they all assume what everybody assumes, that you're going to write about the Southern campaign. But the Southern campaign is already well written on and well documented. That's, in my mind, it's like 1779 to 1781, ends at Yorktown, probably begins with Savannah and all that. But there are plenty of great sources. Why should I even try to match that? That's redundant. And so I looked at an area where I was weak on, and I didn't think the scholarship was very strong on, at least in recent times. And that was the early war. And so I asked this simple question: how did the Southern colonies? Oh, by the way, I should apologize to Maryland for not lumping them in with the Southern colonies, because they could make an argument that they are Southern, but then it wouldn't have balanced out my focus. I needed Maryland in the middle colonies. So how did the Southern colonies react to the news of Lexington and Concord? Because as that teacher, what I noticed is everybody teaches that Lexington and Concord was where the shot heard around the world happened. And then Bunker Hill happened. We got to mention Bunker Hill. And then we declared independence, you know, and I was like, whoa, wait, what else happened? And so I started digging, and I knew about Virginia already. So what happened in the others? And that's the point of this discussion, to look at not only my research from my Southern campaign, or the Southern reaction, but also the middle colonies reaction. So the New England states will be excluded in this on purpose, because frankly, we kind of already know how they reacted to a degree. They rallied to Boston. So I've got up on the board there. No surprise. Oh, by the way, this is an amazing image of the British marching through Concord. I've got up on the board there now. The typical reaction, almost what I found was every colony reacted very similarly. They were outraged, they were angry, and then the British, they were a little surprised at that. Now look at this. I love primary source observations and quotes. So this is New York City. The news reached New York City about the bloodshed in Massachusetts. Let me think, about April 22nd, 23rd. I forget offhand exactly when, but it comes in. And then these are some observations. This is a British captain on board the HMS Kingfisher, who reports on April 26th that the major part of the people here are almost in a state of rebellion. They have broke open the city hall and distributed the city arms to the mob. Were it not for the assistance I have given the transports, these are ships being loaded with provision for the British Army, which has been in Boston for many months now. Make not the least doubt, but they would have been burned. So these people in New York, acted pretty angrily. New Jersey, I'm not going to read everyone verbatim, by the way, but New Jersey, the accounts we have had from Massachusetts have occasioned such an alarm and excited so much uneasiness among the people throughout this and the other colonies that there is danger of their committing some outrageous violence. They are arming themselves. All legal authority and government seems to be drawing to an end. That's Ben Franklin's illegitimate son, William Franklin, governor of New Jersey, commenting on May 6th. And this is about 2 weeks after the news had already reached New Jersey. Pennsylvania, Quaker state. Here, a greater martial spirit prevails than even, if that is possible, than in Virginia and Maryland. The reason this gentleman said this is that this is coming from Richard Caswell, a North Carolinian who's riding to Philadelphia to attend the Continental Congress, and he notices that scarce anything but warlike music is to be heard in the streets of Philadelphia. He's going to the Continental Congress, like I said, and he had seen the reaction in Virginia and Maryland, and he thinks Pennsylvania is more militant, which is quite a surprise, given the pacifist views of so many. Delaware is taking measures to raise money to form to equip their militia. Maryland, Baltimore is raising troops in reaction, again, in reaction to what happened at Lexington and Concord. Virginia. Now, Virginia is a little unique because Virginia had its own incident 2 days before Lexington and Concord. And that was the gunpowder incident. And this is pivotal. And I think this is pivotal for a lot of folks. Here's what's going on. You got to go back to 1774. Let's go back to Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party happens, and Virginians criticized that, and many others criticized that as the destruction of private property. But then when the reaction of the British Parliament comes in, they say that's too much. That's heavy-handed. Then we go and we have a Continental Congress. The Continental Congress comes up with a boycott. Everybody goes along with that. And we think, well, economic measures might work. But then in December, we start hearing reports that the British are taking measures to stop shipments of gunpowder and guns. And worse, well, you know what they were looking for in April in 1775 in Massachusetts? They had marched from Boston to take gunpowder and guns. Well, the same thing happened on April 21st in Williamsburg. That's the powder magazine where there were barrels of gunpowder, like hundreds of pounds of gunpowder in the powder magazine. And the royal governor arranged for some British sailors and perhaps Marines, it's unclear whether there were Marines on the ship, to come into town and steal that gunpowder. Now, I ask you guys, why are they taking our gunpowder and guns and at the same time sending more and more troops into Massachusetts and Boston? That's the thing that starts running through people's minds. In Virginia, they realize, they learn about Lexington and Concord on April 29th. That's when the news came to Williamsburg. And so that's when you could literally see light bulbs going off. Hey, wait a minute. They did it there too. They did it here. They did it there. Conspiracy, you know us, we love conspiracies. That, by the way, is Patrick Henry marching on Williamsburg. He got within a day of Williamsburg with some armed militia. Meanwhile, the royal governor is threatening to burn the city down and arm the slaves in the city, or any slave that'll come to him, and free them. He'll free them and burn the city to ashes. The whole thing gets negotiated away for a moment. But in North Carolina, the royal governor of North Carolina, because he's having the same problems when the news arrives in New Bern, where the capital was, look what he says, infected with the ill spirit that prevails in the adjacent provinces, that means Virginia and South Carolina, independent companies are forming under my nose. He flees the capital at the end of May and goes to a fort down on the Cape Fear River. Okay, Charleston, when they get the news in early May, the daily and nightly sound of drums and fifes discover a spirit in the people to make all possible resistance against that arbitrary power complained of. In a word, the people are resolved to do all in their power to resist. All right, and then nothing less is talked of than storming Boston. That's this is a separate quote from the secretary to the governor of South Carolina, the royal governor of South Carolina. So they're talking war in South Carolina. And even Georgia, who didn't send a delegation to the first Continental Congress, and who has a governor who is very popular, a royal governor who's very popular, and been there for over a decade. Georgia is all in commotion, according to Henry Lawrence, who lives in South Carolina. They raided their own powder magazine and seized the gunpowder before the governor or British sailors from a nearby ship could do it. And then here's one from Lieutenant Grant on that ship I mentioned. This colony, being like all others through America, is an anarchy and confusion. So there, I laid out the argument that the reaction is nearly universal throughout the colonies. Everybody's upset. So now I want to go over and talk about what happened, what big events happened. Are you guys familiar with Fort Ticonderoga and the seizure of the fort in May? It's quite a humorous story. It involves Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen, and Ethan Allen's got the Green Mountain Boys, and Arnold's got himself because his men aren't there yet. But Arnold got a piece of paper that says he's in command, but that paper's from Massachusetts, and Ethan Allen's been appointed by Connecticut. I mean, it's just a big mess. But the bottom line is, we see Fort Ticonderoga early in the morning literally, look at that picture. That's the commander in his night clothes waking up going, huh? What's going on out here? The fort is ours. Nobody, the gate was open. They hadn't heard about all the ruckus going on throughout the other colonies. And so that was an easy grab to secure that. Not because the fort is strategically important at the time, that's kind of past, but because the supplies, the cannon that are there, and the other ordnance that are there. I already mentioned Governor Martin fleeing New Bern in late May. I kind of preempted that. But now let's talk about what happened right here. This was really neat. I don't know about you, but because you guys are New Yorkers, so you know more about what happened here than I do. And I was raised, when I taught history, I got to teach with a dear friend who was an English teacher. And one of the things she liked to do is show scenes from the musical 1776. I don't know why. I kept telling her, God, it's not historical, but they did. And if you've ever seen that movie, it is historical, and there's some good history in it, but it's also very foolish. And the way New York is portrayed in that is always abstaining courteously, if you remember that movie. Then fast forward, go to the John Adams series, right? The John Adams miniseries. Have you seen that? How does New York come off in that? Mr. Dwayne screaming, no, this is crazy. And so New York has this reputation out there. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but New York has this reputation of being the least patriotic of all the 13 colonies. And I think it's unfair. I think they told people, I was not aware of this until I did the research. There were 100 British troops from the Royal Irish Regiment stationed here and still here in May 1775 and June 1775. Now, yeah, they were probably looking a little bit like this, but they were still here because, again, we're all English. And then the HMS Asia, a big 64-gun British warship, sails into the harbor. And that's the opportunity for Major Isaac Hamilton, in charge of the regiment there, the British contingent. He says, well, I'm going to leave the barracks. I'm not sure where the barracks was. And I'm going to move my men aboard that ship because it's a big ship. And he gets permission from the city and the New York Provincial Congress to do that. And so on June 7th, which, by the way, a year later is the date of the resolution on independence submitted to the Congress by Virginia. But on June 7th, 1775, you have 100 soldiers, red-coated soldiers, marching down the streets of New York with their arms and all their gear, and they're heading to that ship. And behind them are wagons carrying the extra gear. They're not going to leave any arms behind or anything like that. Well, there's a gentleman named, right there. I knew I had it somewhere. Marnus Willett, Mr. Willett. And he was a leader, and he got the crowd all agitated about this, and he stopped them. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. You're allowed to leave with your arms, but not the extra arm. You don't have permission to take your extra gear. And then he also started urging the soldiers to desert. Now, this was a key moment, guys, because you got a British major and he's being kind of harangued. Think about Boston Massacre or something. He's being harangued by this mob, and then they grab the wagons and they kind of move direction, take him down some alleys. What are you going to do, Major Hamilton? What are you going to do? They're stealing His Majesty's property. Well, he chooses to let it go. Must have been a bitter pill for him to swallow too. And this is what he writes the next day to the lieutenant governor of in charge of New York, because the governor was away. Had it we been equally prone to acts of violence as the mob was, and which indeed we had sufficient provocation to justify us in, the consequences might have been fatal to many. But he chose not to push the subject and swallow his pride. Okay, so they dodged that. The very next day, long way away down in Williamsburg, another royal governor flees because he feels threatened. Lord Dunmore. Everybody blamed him for the gunpowder incident in April in Williamsburg, and they didn't like his threats to burn Williamsburg and free slaves. And so he finally, there were other issues coming on. Some of his letters that he'd written to London were being published there and here, and it made him look very poor in Virginians' eyes. And so he flees. He goes to a British warship in the York River on June 8th. That's it. When he leaves, that's royal authority is gone in Virginia, and it's pretty much gone in North Carolina too. The Continental Congress on June 14th takes a huge step. They take charge of the army outside of New England, the New England Army. They also add rifle companies from Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. My favorite being Daniel Morgan's company, the famous patriot, going to rise up to be a general. They appoint General Washington. You guys know why they picked General Washington to be to be the general of the army? He had experience, but there were plenty of people that had military experience. He was from Virginia. Virginia is an important colony, and they're trying to draw Virginia more into the battle. They appoint General Philip Schuyler, one of 4 major generals. And he pretty much gets his own army here in New York, the Northern Army. And then General Richard Montgomery, he has more experience. He's a former British officer, and he becomes one of 8 brigadier generals. And they also, because of letters from Arnold, saying, hey, these guys in Canada, these Brits in Canada are getting ready to come down Lake Champlain and attack. We should do something about it. And Congress agreed and authorized a preemptive strike against Canada. Let's come back. Now, Governor Tryon, who used to be the governor of North Carolina, had moved to New York several years earlier, was away in London England taking care of family matters. And he comes back to New York in late June. Literally on the same day George Washington and his entourage goes through. So you had this crazy situation where the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army is passing through New York on the way to Massachusetts with other officers and such. And the public turns out and they cheer him. And then several hours later, the royal governor of New York lands and the people come out and they cheer him. Right. It's kind of a little bit weird that's going on. Now, New York at this time, in the summer of 1775, also does something. The provincial Congress agrees to raise 3,000 troops, and they form 4 regiments out of them. Okay, 3,000 troops. Now, it helped a little bit that the Continental Congress said, we'll pay for them. We'll pay for them. So that was spread around. But guys, there aren't that many, aside from New England, you can't find another Continental regiment being formed outside of New England, except for here in New York. They're coming, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all that. Virginians won't be until December, but the other ones are in the fall. But New York is in the summer, okay? And then all of these regiments are ordered to go north to Albany, probably in preparation for the attack on Canada. Notice the new militia bill calling for the age to serve, 16 to 50. And I don't know if you knew this, but you guys get your own Minutemen too. 1/4 of that militia being formed is supposed to be Minutemen. Now, this is interesting. This is Governor Tryon saying, what they're shooting for is independency. Not all of them. He admits that it's not universal and it's not even a majority yet, but there is an independence movement early on. Now, you and I all go, duh. I mean, it seems like that's what this is about, but it really wasn't. We have to remind ourselves that in the summer of 1775, no one in the Continental Congress is talking about independence. That's why all these Bunker Hill is going to help move us along. And then all the other battles that happen all throughout the colonies are going to help us in that direction. Thomas Paine's publication, all that. But independency, right? No, it's not really talked about much among the patriot circles. All right. Now, got to go real quick on some of the others, because now what else is going on? You got to go back to South Carolina. Again, watching those movies that or shows that I told you about. How does South Carolina come across in 1776 or John Adams? They seem to be very resistant to independence, but yet they're sending ships to go get gunpowder in the West Indies. They're forming an army to fight. This is in June. This is before Virginia. Virginia's only raising volunteer companies at this point. They're issuing paper money to pay for it all. In North Carolina, the fort that the governor had fled to, he abandons it, go out into the Cape Fear River in this little tiny British warship, and then militia burned down this fort, public property. I mean, not public property, but it's basically royal property. So they burn it down. Not quite, I wouldn't call that conflict, but on the other hand, it's definitely vandalism. Delaware, you've got a situation of a British warship parked off of Delaware, demanding to be provisioned, or else they're gonna bombard Newcastle. The guys in Delaware are printing out their own money. Maryland's printing out money to pay for what, guys? To pay for what? To pay for a conflict. And then we get to this. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the HMS Asia blasting the battery. Yeah, I wasn't. You guys beat Virginia by 3 months in terms of conflict. I know, blasted this building. I learned that today. I didn't know about the cannonball through the roof. So it's August 23rd, 1775. The Asia's been out there in the harbor for 2 months, kind of, maintaining a semblance of order. I think the royal governor's still in New York City, but down by the battery, there are these big cannon sitting there. And on that night, John Lamb and some others decided they're going to take them. They're going to secure them. But the British commander was tipped off about that. So he had this little, longboat full of some of his sailors very close to shore, listening. And they were going to signal if anybody tried to steal those cannon. Well, sure enough, they heard a commotion. They thought, hey, they're taking them, because you got to dismantle them. I don't know if they were dismantled, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes they get dismantled on carriages to prevent them from being stolen. But in any case, they're being taken now. And so the longboat fires a signal shot. Now, by every account I've ever read, it wasn't a shot at the militia that was stealing the gun, taking the cannon. It was a shot to signal the boat, the ship. But the militia thought they were being fired on, and they fired in the darkness where the shot came from, and they struck and killed a sailor. And then, of course, the boat is rowing back to the ship, and the captain learns what happened. So he fires 3 cannon shot at the town. Now the town, you got drummers playing the long roll. You guys ever heard the long roll? It's very alarming, and everybody's running around, and it looks like the militia are getting ready to actually fight this boat, a ship-to-shore fight. And then this is the amazing part: the British commander fires an entire broadside. Now there's 64 guns on the ship, which means there's 32 on one side and 32 on the other, or at least 30. So he blasts the city with the cannon fire. And I'm told that 1 cannonball entered this building here. That's a provocative incident right there. Now, the next day, the magistrates and the mayor meet with the captain, and they try to scold the captain, and the captain said, look, I'm defending my ship. You guys, I've got a dead sailor on hand because of you, and you have no right to steal the cannon, which, by the way, was taken away successfully. But we had an armed clash right here. It didn't turn into a major battle, but still, it was in New York. It wasn't in Virginia. It takes another 3 months before people start dying in Virginia. What is happening in Virginia? Well, they are finally in late August, early September, getting serious, raising what we call regulars. These are people that are going to, soldiers that are going to serve for a year, and battalions of Minutemen and the militia itself. And Lord Dunmore, who I told you fled, has been on a ship first in the York River. Now he's gone over to off of Norfolk, Virginia. He doesn't have much besides the British Navy protecting him, but then he gets a few, he gets about 120 redcoats from St. Augustine, from the 14th Regiment. That's all he's got. Nowhere near enough. Okay. North Carolina, again, same thing. And notice the date, September 1st. They're arming themselves, creating. By the way, Continental Congress offers to pay for that. Now let's talk about the fall. Because remember, I'm only going to go, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all the way to the independence. I'm only going to go through 1775. That's it. So we're going to talk about one more season, and then we'll probably be it. But I should pause right here. Anybody have any questions so far? And there'll be a time at the end to ask questions, but are you clear? Are you following? Okay, now things, it's like a snowball rolling down a hill, right? It's going to get bigger and bigger. New York, late August, General Schuyler orders General Montgomery to leave Fort Ticonderoga. They go up the Lake Champlain, and their objective is to seize St. John's because the British have been building some vessels to use in their attack down Lake Champlain, and then get Montreal. But the gold of the prize is going to be Quebec, the walled city, the same city that when it fell in the French and Indian War, pretty much settled the French and Indian War. Now, this is what brings me here, to be honest with you guys, besides the invitation. Normally, I wouldn't make this long trip north unless I was coming up this way, and I am. I'm going to be part of General Washington's expedition through Maine to go to Canada. And so Washington sends a force under Benedict Arnold, the famous trader, who's a hero in this and at Saratoga. And so it's a blurry vision, but basically you've got the New Yorkers going up Lake Champlain, which would be to your left. And then Arnold's force of 1,000 or 1,100 men have sailed from Newburyport up to Maine. And now they're going to march through the wilderness of Maine. It's a heck of a trek. And if you've never read an account of it, you need to, because it happened 250 years ago. Now they've already started. It was September 19th when they left by ship to get to Maine. And it's just an amazing story. And so the idea there, it's a pincer movement. If you look at it, it's going to be Governor Guy Carleton is in charge of Canada, and he's going to have to make a choice because he doesn't have a lot of redcoats there. There's a lot of redcoats in Boston, but they're hunkered down during the siege of Boston. They're not available. And so literally there's just a few hundred redcoats in Canada, and they're going to get attacked from two sides if the plan goes according to plan. What happens is from September, October, and November, General Montgomery has most of those redcoats pinned down at St. John's in a fort. You see the numbers there. And Montgomery's got more men, but he doesn't have a lot of artillery, and a siege takes place. And at one point, it starts to break down. Discipline, the Americans run out of supplies, but then they get resupplied when a smaller British fort surrenders 12 miles away up. It's hard. It's downriver, but the rivers are flowing north there to the St. Lawrence River. And so that keeps the siege going. Then the British relief force coming out of Montreal under Guy Carleton is repulsed on before they even land on the south side of the St. Lawrence River. So they go back to Montreal. And then what happens is the garrison at St. John's basically demoralized because they're not getting any help. They surrender. That's what you get in sieges. It's a matter of will. Now we have just taken out 2/3 of the British force in Canada by capturing St. John's. Then Guy Carleton abandons Montreal. So now General Montgomery captures Montreal, and most of the men that were in Montreal get captured as they're trying to make their way to Quebec. Only Carleton and a handful of men make it to Quebec. So he's literally only got 100 or so redcoats, and he's got to count on the French militia to defend Quebec. Now it is a walled city, so he doesn't have that going for him. Okay. But all that is really remains in Canada is Quebec. And we may have control of Canada, the 14th colony is sometimes referred to, if we can get Quebec. Now, while that was going on up there, Governor Campbell in South Carolina flees because he feels threatened. So there's another royal governor fleeing. Governor Tryon does the same thing in New York in October. So you see what's happening. All this, the royal authority is evaporating. New Jersey and Pennsylvania both agree to raise continental regiments now. These are going to be full-time soldiers, not militia. A very big difference between the two. The Congress has got to pay for them. And then we have in late October, finally, Virginia has a battle. Virginians are fighting up north. Daniel Morgan's marching to Canada, and there are Virginians outside of Boston, those riflemen I mentioned. But here in Hampton in late October, 5 small British vessels try to sail up the Hampton River and burn the city of Hampton. Okay, they are repulsed after 2 days of heavy fighting along. It was a ship-to-shore fight, and they failed to do it. But a week before this happens, they actually do burn down an entire town in Massachusetts, which is now Maine, in Falmouth, which is now Portland, Maine, and those guys did not resist, and so their town was burned almost to the ground, whereas Hampton survived. But this is also one of those Rubicon moments, right? Crossing the Rubicon. Up until this point, for 6 months, Virginians had not seen war. But now, once you rip that scab off, and bam, you're fighting. Now we have killed some of them, and they fired back and wounded some of us. It's a lot easier to do it again and again. And that's exactly what happens. There's a little bit of a skirmish outside of Charleston, again, between the British Navy. And by the way, have you noticed a theme in a lot of these colonies outside? We're not engaging the British Army usually, because they're all hemmed up in either Boston or up in Canada for the most part. We're having these engagements now with the British Navy because that's all that the British have. That's how they're projecting their force in the other colonies. There's a little fight in what we call Virginia Beach now, but back then it was Princess Anne County and a place called Kempsville. Now, this is important because after this victory, Lord Dunmore is still trying to get back in power. He issues a royal proclamation calling on all loyal Virginians to rally to the flag, rally to him and fight for him. Now, very few do, but he also adds this. And if you are an enslaved man, I'm paraphrasing now. If you're an enslaved man of a rebel and you come and fight for me, I will grant you your freedom. And he reports soon after, hundreds and then soon thousands start leaving and coming to him. Now, it's hundreds of men, and others are running away too. He's only promising freedom to those who fight for him. Okay, but that's what's going on in November in Virginia. Okay, in November in South Carolina, there's a big 3-day battle up in a place called 96, which is the backcountry. Now, this one's unique because it doesn't involve a single British soldier. It's Tories versus Patriots for 3 days, and it literally ends with an agreement to kind of back away. It's kind of unresolved and both sides kind of walk away, but people die in this 3-day fight up in 96. And of course, if you know anything about the South, there's a lot of that whole nasty fighting, Patriot versus Tory and all that. And then there's the Battle of Great Bridge in December 1775. This is Lord Dunmore overplaying his hand now because his forces are growing, but he still doesn't have a whole lot of redcoats. And he was trying to make Norfolk, Virginia, a base of operation. So what he does is he needs to secure the access points, and there is a long causeway, and he builds a little fort there. And then the Virginia forces come around and kind of stand off on the other side of what was called the Great Bridge, and they snipe at each other for a week. And then Dunmore gets reports that more reinforcements with cannon are coming, so he gets a little nervous about that because this fort is pretty weak. So he orders an attack, and they get pummeled. The redcoats do. In fact, the commander, a guy named William Woodford, who, by the way, will rise to the rank of brigadier general and is buried right over here at Trinity, somewhere in the Trinity Church graveyard there. He called it a mini Bunker Hill, except we held our position. But that really clipped the wings of Lord Dunmore and made him much less of a threat in Virginia. He hangs around for another 6 months, but he's lost a lot. And then, of course, at the very end of the year, the last battle we're going to talk about, the storming of Quebec. Again, another epic story. Poor General Montgomery is leading. He's leading one of, you see it's another pincer movement. I guess maybe I could try to point it from here. Yeah, I can. So this is Montgomery and the New Yorkers. He's only got about 300 because every time he captures someplace, he has to leave men behind, keep his supply lines from being harassed by perhaps Indians that are on the British side. So basically, he and 300 men are coming in this direction. Colonel Arnold, Daniel Morgan, and others that survived the Long March are attacking in a blinding blizzard on New Year's Eve, and basically they reach this obstacle, and the garrison is just about fleeing. It's literally they're getting ready to give up and run, and on their way out, they light a cannon, and it hits General Montgomery right in the head. It kills him instantly. And then the second in command it takes down some of his officers too. And then those that are left are so freaked out by that they basically retreat. And so the plan was to meet in the middle at the lower town and then work your way up over the walls. This is the more vulnerable lower town. So this one fails. And then this one, Arnold gets wounded in the leg. Dan Morgan, my favorite guy, he helps lead these guys on. He's just a captain, but he's very heroic, and they break through one barrier, but they can't get through the other one. And then with the other part of the attack done, reinforcements come and they trap these poor guys in between the two barriers, and they're forced to surrender. We're talking street fighting, house to house fighting and all that in a snowstorm. And if you know anything about flintlocks and wet snow and all that, it's not going to work. Your guns start to misfire. Rifles don't do well against bayonets, by the way. And so it's a failure. The attack fails, and it's a big blow to our morale here. I mean, we're not talking like losing Brooklyn Heights or losing New York blow, but it was still like a surprise to us because things had seemingly been going in our direction. So that ends 1775. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. And that's pretty much where I want to end. By the end of 1775, we've got an armed conflict all over the colonies. And by the way, I didn't even mention Rhode Island and other parts of Maine. And in Connecticut, there's fighting. I didn't mention them because we kept them out because they're all blocked in as New England. And so it's very little chance when you have that much fighting that you're going to all of a sudden decide to stop. We're kind of reaching a point where it's going to go on until one side or the other surrenders. And that's where we are. And then 1776, I'm not going to go into that because I've run out of time. There. Said it.
Thank you, Mr. Cecere. We have some time for questions now. If anybody in the audience or online has them, please raise your hand. We'll call on us as soon as we can. In the back, the red shirt.
What in your research, or even just while you've been visiting, were you surprised to learn about with regards to Fraunces Tavern?
Well, I've been trying to tell the story to everybody, and nobody remembers this, but the first time I ever heard of Fraunces Tavern, I think I was a kid and I saw a commercial, and I swear it was for coffee. And they said, we're at world famous Fraunces Tavern and we're doing a taste test. And that's what, does anybody remember that commercial? That's what I said. Yes, I told you it was Taster's Choice. Thank you. It's got to be true because you've just confirmed a very minute detail. Thank you. And so that's all I knew about Fraunces Tavern. And then, of course, the next thing I knew was it still survived. That in itself is amazing that it was still here with all the development that's happened. Then I go up there and I knew about Washington saying goodbye to Congress at Annapolis, and then rushing home to get home for Christmas in 1783. And I knew about the Newburgh incident in New York, up the river, where he stopped pretty much a mutiny from going on. But I wasn't as aware of the meeting that happened here. I didn't know it happened here, but the farewell to his officers. And it's very, very moving. And I've been reenacting for 25 years. And so I can imagine how in his 8 years in the field, how close he came to some of these guys that were still with him. And it happened. I was in the room today. I was in the room where, he said his farewell. And by the way, Washington, he had a quick temper, so you would catch that emotion, but to see the sentiment that was displayed and reported by the Colonel Talmadge, who wrote about it, was there. It's moving. It's very moving. So the other thing I was not aware of, I didn't know that this was made land, that this was actually this building I assumed was on part of the island, but apparently they filled in the 1600s to make this. I mean, we'd be standing in water if this was 80 or something like that. And that, I knew that every city, Charleston, South Carolina, has a very similar story. It expands out, but I thought that came later. So there's a lot of different. This is a great place, with a lot of great. Oh, and I am convinced that Samuel Fraunces is so popular because he must have been a heck of a cook. Somebody even, as one of the panels said, a chef. And, he gets caught by the British and they make him cook for the British officers. It had to be the cooking. Yeah, it had to be. So that's pretty neat. I thought it was neat. And well, right. Then he gave him an opportunity to spy. How about other questions? We have any? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not the member.
Can you comment on which groups in the middle colony supported the crown and which were more prone to the revolution? I mean, like ethnically, Germans, English, Quakers, was there a breakdown ethnically or not so much?
Well,
Scots Irish.
no, it's funny. In the middle colonies, I can't say I noticed that as much as I noticed that in North Carolina. In 1776, in February, if we had gone just a little bit more, the next battle I probably would have talked about was Moores Creek Bridge. And that was a really important battle because the British had detached a portion of their army in Boston and reinforcements from England under General Clinton, Henry Clinton. And he was going down south because Governor Martin had been saying, I have a lot of supporters. I have a lot of supporters. And it happened to be Scotch Irish Highlanders from the back country, which to this day, I don't understand, because these are the same guys who, then at the Jacobites at Culloden, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. Tried to overthrow the king, and now they've sworn their loyalty and they're going to live up to it. But they get crushed in a 3-minute battle at Moores Creek Bridge. So that kind of thing I didn't see so much in Pennsylvania. There is a lot of Quakers following their faith, and there's some griping about that, about them not supporting the military cause, despite what I read early on the initial reactions. Even the Quakers are upset, but down the road, I think many of them held to their pacifist views. Maryland surprised me. Maryland was one of these colonies, and they're in the middle colonies for me. Maryland was one of these colonies that was very militant at first. They started forming a militia way before Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And when he said that, by the way, what he was saying is, it's time to get serious, Virginia, and prepare for war. And all he wanted was each county to raise one company, 60 men, 70 men. But Maryland created a whole new militia system before Patrick Henry even gave that speech. I got one for you, though. Delaware. Delaware had a Tory uprising in June of 1776 that was very close to stopping them from voting for independence. And Maryland, again, dragged their feet. They were the last one to actually, remember, the delegates didn't always have a free hand. They were following instructions. And Maryland, the provincial Congress, had not given their Maryland delegates permission to vote for independence. In fact, they had forbidden them to do that until they got the word. And that word didn't show up until June 28th, June 29th, something like that. And you got to read John Adams in this time period and some of the stuff he's talking about. He's very sarcastic about Maryland. He's not very nice to New York too, by the way. New York, of course, New York abstained, but that was the provincial Congress. Look, you guys are in an impossible situation. You're voting for independence, and there's 30,000 British redcoats getting ready to come into the town, and a fleet of 150 ships and transports. I could see why you'd be like, let's not talk about this right now. But you guys, I think it was July 8th that you approved independence. I say you guys like it was you. I'm sorry. But that's yes.
You said you're going to be going up to Maine after you visit here to replicate the Arnold journey through Maine. Looking at it based on your understanding of the facts, did it make any sense to have that second prong try to go up through Maine as opposed to concentrating forces and just have everyone go up with Montgomery towards Montreal and then?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question, because if Montgomery had the number of men he had originally expected, he might have been able to do it himself. But what happened is, like I mentioned earlier, the more victories he had a garrison St. John's. He had to keep control of Montreal, and people were leaving because it was near the end of the year and their enlistments were up. So his force dwindled. So if he had another 1,000 men, yeah, maybe he could have done it himself. The idea, Washington came up with this idea after he knew that General Schuyler was getting ready to send that force up. And his explanation, you can read it in his letters, is basically this expeditionary force can do one of two things. It will either force Carleton to go back to Quebec, opening the road for you, and then you'd have to deal with Arnold, or he's going to stay there, and then Arnold can take Quebec himself. That was the thinking. What they messed up on were several things. Logistics. They didn't know the trek would be as hard as it was. They rushed it. The bateau, they built 200 bateau in 2 weeks, and most of the wood they used, or much of the wood they used, was green. So the bateau did not hold up well. Even the provisions, some of the meat that they salted and all that was slaughtered in the summer and got rank. Many of the barrels leaked, and so they had hard bread, but then the moisture got into it. So literally these guys, by the time they got to the last week of this march, and they were past Maine. Now they're into Canada, but they're in trouble. And they're starving, and they're eating their leather belts, their pouches, their moccasins, and a Newfoundland dog that I think Captain Henry Dearborn brought with him. They're desperate. And it just so happened that Arnold had sent some men, including himself, had gone forward and was able to find a town and send some cattle up. So part of Arnold's force turned back without any orders, by the way. That was a huge disappointment and deal. But those that survived were still about 550 men. But against the walled city, they don't hardly have any artillery to speak of, and certainly ain't nothing that's going to breach a walled city. So I think the other issue is timing. If your question premises that Washington could have got those men all the way over to Fort Ticonderoga and then marched up, but I don't know if that was possible in the time that he had. So I think he thought this was a better plan, go up.
You have time for one more question?
You mentioned the militia, the regulars, and the Minutemen.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference?
Yeah. Militia is pretty much it depends on the colony, but pretty much if it's any free man between the ages usually 18 to 50, sometimes it's 16 to 60. It all depends on the situation going on. That everyone's in the militia just automatically. But then the Minutemen are expected to do more, and usually the laws usually say, and a quarter of your militia should be designated Minutemen. And that's kind of your rapid point deployment force. And I'm betting you don't have a lot of 60-year-olds being 60. And I'm betting you don't have a lot of young ones, but you do probably have, I'm sure the average age is close to 20s and 30s, but not always. And then the regulars, my favorite, those are your soldiers, which you remember prior to this, the regulars were our British Army. The redcoats were us. Not us, but we were all English. So now we have to form, we did it during the French and Indian War too. They were often called provincial soldiers, but they served for a continuous time, a year or 2 years. And in some cases, our duration was 3 years or the duration of the war. And those guys end up being the Continental Army, and they're the best soldiers, no doubt about it. The Minutemen kind of fade away. We just don't have enough to support minute battalions and the Continental Army. But everybody, the militia are really your emergency force. They don't go into battle. Washington's constantly complaining how they take more than they're worth. They'll show up, they'll make provision harder to keep everybody fed. And then when he needs them, and you guys know better than most, because in next year is the 250th anniversary of the retreat across New Jersey. And that's exactly what he has to go through. All these guys that are around that could help him are like, oh no, I'm gone, I'm out of here, I did my time, I was called up for 2 weeks and I'm out. So yeah.
So what did the Minutemen, how do you distinguish what they did or how they were trained?
Let me refer you to like Massachusetts. Massachusetts kind of came up with is a one that most people know. So the Minutemen would train more often. If you join a minute unit, a Minuteman unit, or a minute company, they would call it, or a minute battalion, you trained more often, and you might be expected to serve, and you might even have them be able to be sent out of the colony. The militia don't have, they're basically called up. Maybe they train once a month. They're called up only on emergencies and for local situations, typically. Now, that's not universal. Like in 1777, there are Virginia militia going north, and I don't think they were minute companies by then anymore. So there are militia going north to help Washington at Valley Forge or before Valley Forge. But again, they're not staying for a full year. And so you waste, you try to train them, and then they leave with whatever training they have. And they've eating all their provisions and all that.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well done.
Hope so.
Thanks.
I hope so.
We've got a little bit, a little certificate of appreciation here from Michael. Come on over here. Show everybody.
Awesome. Certainly, certainly. All right, Scott, you're gonna close this out?
Thank you so much to Michael Cecere for the wonderful presentation, and thank you all for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed tonight's lecture and would like to stay up to date with all of our programs, you can join our mailing list by going either to sonsoftherevolution.org or FrauncestavernMuseum.org. There you can find our calendars of events for all of our upcoming programs. Thank you to those who have donated to the museum. Your generous support helps us fulfill our mission and share the history of the American Revolutionary era with the public. If you would like to donate, you can also visit the museum website, FrauncestavernMuseum.org. For those of you who would like a book signed by Michael, we have them available briefly after the event, just at the back of the room. For those attending the dinner, please make your way down to from the museum to the Bissell Room. The restaurant and museum staff will help guide you there after the program. Thank you again for joining us in person and online. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Phone, by the way. That's a cassette.
Oh,
Yeah, I thought that was so great. I looked at it. I have a good pen.
A son of the revolution.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Sure, absolutely.